podcast advertising contracts, what you need to know and what you need to look out for. I know what you're thinking. Contracts? That's boring. Am I right? But when it comes to podcast advertising, those boring details are where the money is. A good podcast ad contract can open doors for more income, and a bad one can leave you locked into a bad deal or worse, unpaid, holding an empty bag. So today, we are breaking down the key terms that you need to understand before you sign on that dotted line. And I just want to make sure that your show and your wallet can stay protected. So stick around. Welcome back to Legit Podcast Pro. I'm your host, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. I'm here to help you, as I am every Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. live on YouTube and Facebook and other things, and then again on your favorite podcast apps for your later consumption. I'm here to help you navigate the legal and the business side of the podcasting world. And in today's episode, we are diving into podcast ad contracts. If you want to build reliable income streams with advertisers, understanding the fine print is essential. These contracts cover more than just payment. They control how, when, and where you'll work with sponsors and what rights both you and the advertisers will have. Knowing what to expect and what to avoid will empower you to negotiate better deals, protect your content, and build sustainable partnerships that benefit your show and you in the long run. So what goes into a podcast advertising contract? Well, at its core, an advertising contract, of course, lays out the terms of the relationship between the podcaster, that's you, and the advertiser. It defines expectations for both sides. It ensures clarity about the deliverables, the payments, the timelines. And, well, here's a breakdown of the kinds of things you'll typically see. First off, those deliverables. This is where you spell out what the advertiser is paying for. Is it a 30-second host-read ad? Or a scripted message, or maybe it's a rolled in audio complete, advertising package, a commercial, or maybe it's a whole episode is being sponsored. So you have to be clear on whether the ad needs to be read exactly as provided, or if you have creative freedom, when and where, all those kinds of things. Next up is that placement and frequency. This is referring to where the ad will appear in your episode. Is it a pre-roll at the beginning of the show, or mid-roll, that means in the middle, or post-roll? And how often is it supposed to run? Some advertisers prefer prime slots like mid-roll because they engage the listeners more effectively. So understanding placement expectations can impact your negotiation strategy. And if the budget for the ads is on the smallish side, maybe you don't want to give up that prime real estate in your show for a small ad commitment. So negotiate. Some key terms that you should watch out for in your deals? Well, the payment structure, of course, is very important. Is it a flat fee or a CPM deal? A flat fee guarantees you a fixed amount regardless of the number of downloads or listens or those kinds of things. That can be very helpful if your audience size fluctuates. But on the other hand, the CPM, or cost per mil, ties your payment to the number of downloads per 1,000 impressions. And that is how you can reward growth and encourage everybody to stick around. But adding some uncertainty to the thing is the downside. So make sure you're comfortable with how the payments are going to be structured. And then you have to look at the payment schedule. When are you going to get paid? Whether it's upfront or after the campaign ends or at regular intervals during the campaign, you need to be thinking carefully about that because late or inconsistent payments can disrupt your cash flow and make it just harder to do everything. So always look for clear deadlines and ensure that there's a plan for handling missed payments. In fact, one thing that comes up often when you're dealing with ad sales agencies or the network is selling the ads for you is that the contract will often provide for them to pay you after they get paid, 30 days after we receive payment for any ads and so on. You got to be thoughtful and careful about that. Unfortunately, I've seen quite a number of podcasters get burned when they fulfilled a bunch of advertising. That is, they gave up their inventory, the space in their show, for ads that they never got paid for because the ad sales folks didn't collect from the sponsor. Sometimes it's the sponsor's fault, but as often as not, it's the fault of the ad sales folks who aren't willing to go chasing down missed payments or unpaid amounts. And they just say, well, it's just a cost of doing business and yada, yada, yada. And that is not okay if you're the creator who's parting with that ad inventory. So make sure that your contract has some kind of a provision in there that if you fulfill on that inventory, you do get paid regardless whether they collect. And that's how you hold their feet to the fire. All right, that's an important one. Exclusivity clauses is another provision that you need to think about in advertiser contracts. Does the advertiser want to prevent you from working with their competitors? Some exclusivity clauses are just for a short period, often just that particular episode or the episodes during this campaign, but others will extend for months or even years. So make sure that the terms are fair and they won't unreasonably restrict your ability to partner with other brands, especially if this particular deal isn't really providing enough income to justify giving up those future opportunities. So be thoughtful about that. And after all, you watch a football game, you're going to see an ad for brand A of the beer and then brand B or soft drinks or whatever. So you don't have to be exclusive. But if you are being exclusive, there's value in that, and you should extract a higher price for the compensation. The duration or length of the agreement is another factor we need to talk about. The contract should specify how long it lasts. This could be for a single campaign, could be a few months, could be years. You've got to pay attention to this stuff. In fact, I had one client, a podcaster, came to me after they had made a deal. There was an email exchange for $1,000 per podcast. And the problem came up when it became clear, unfortunately, too late in the game, they'd already been collecting $1,000 per episode. Well, that was the podcaster, the host's thinking was it was a per episode fee. The sponsor thought they were talking about a whole season as the podcast. So be thoughtful about the words. Per podcast was the problem there. Pay attention also to things like automatic renewal clauses that could lock you into an extended commitment if you don't take steps to opt out. Make note of deadlines to renew or terminate the contract if that's what the contract calls for. So that way you don't get stuck in an unwanted agreement that you have, or, vice versa. You don't want to get stuck with an agreement expiring because you forgot to do something, right? Okay. Approvals and content control. Some advertisers want to have control over the way the ads are read, and require you to submit scripts or recordings for approval. And this is pretty common, but it can be pretty restrictive, especially if you're on a tight publishing schedule. And the flip side of this is true too, where you, the host of the show, the voice that's saying these words, you should want to have some approval rights over the ad copy that you're reading and the specific wording of the message and those kinds of things, as well as just choosing which ads you're going to take and which ones you're not. So be wary of overly restrictive controls that might limit your authentic voice, and also be wary of overly limiting restrictions on your controls that would prevent you from vetoing an ad because you don't believe in the sponsor or something like that. You want to make sure that your ads feel natural to your audience and are a good fit. So clarify how much input you'll have on those final products and so on. The termination clause is another thing we have to talk about. Make sure you understand the conditions under which either side could end the agreement early. Does the advertiser have the right to pull the plug mid-campaign? Well, what happens if you've already been paid either in full or in steps, but you haven't fulfilled on it all yet? Are you going to be required to return payments or partial payments if they cancel the deal? Having a clear termination clause that addresses these kinds of questions makes sure that the parties know what to expect and reduces the chances of there being a conflict if things don't go as planned for some reason. Now, there are a few red flags that we want to talk about so you can avoid them. First off is the lack of clear metrics. What are you measuring? Performance-based deals like CPM campaigns have to have clear metrics in order to determine how payment's going to be calculated. If the contract isn't specific about how downloads or streams or impressions are going to be measured, you could end up either underpaid or unpaid or in some kind of a dispute over whether you've delivered properly and so on. So what you got to do is make sure that everybody involved, the sponsor, the advertiser, and the host of the show, all agree on which metrics you're going to use. Are you looking at numbers from a particular source? Are you looking at you want it to be as objective as possible. Another thing is the vague terminology. There you go again with that per podcast kind of thing. You've got to watch out for language that's too open-ended or unclear, like at the advertiser's discretion. These kinds of phrases give the advertiser too much control and potentially allow them to change the terms of the deal or delay payment without any consequence. The same could be true in the converse if it's at the podcaster's discretion, like, for example, maybe placement of the ad, right? So you want to make sure you have as much clarity on deliverables, timelines, and expectations so you don't find yourself guessing or, worse yet, holding an empty bag. Non-compete restrictions is another thing. Some advertisers might try to include a non-compete clause. Now, this is a little different from that exclusivity clause because the exclusivity is going to be limited to the show or the campaign or the episode or whatever. But a non-compete clause might prevent you from working with your advertiser's competitors for a longer time. And if those terms are too broad or the duration of the thing lasts too long, it could really limit your ability to secure future deals and hurt your revenue potential. So always negotiate these kinds of things to make sure you're not sacrificing valuable future opportunities for this single campaign. So podcast advertising can be a great way to monetize your show, especially if you have a good-sized audience. But not all deals are created equal. Taking the time to understand the key terms, knowing when to push back and how to negotiate can help you avoid headaches down the road. Contracts are there, after all, to protect all of the parties, but they need to be fair and balanced. So don't let the excitement of landing an advertiser blind you to terms that could cause pain or hurt in your business. It is always better, I say, to walk away from a bad deal than to get stuck with one that's costing you time, money, creative freedom, and headaches. And after all, I'd much rather be standing around wondering why I didn't make any money than why I did all that stuff and the money I was supposed to make didn't come, right? Anyway, if you're ever in doubt, it is a good idea to consult a lawyer or use professionally prepared legal templates to ensure that your contracts are as airtight as possible. And for podcast-specific contracts and other legal resources, wouldn't you know it? We've got those for you over at podcastlawforms.com. You can get lawyer-drafted basic podcast advertising contracts and all kinds of other legal forms and templates you might need for your podcast right over there at podcastlawforms.com. Thanks for being here. I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and I'll see you again next week with another episode of Legit Podcast Pro. Thanks.